Wow. It is so great to welcome back comedian Rich Shydner to the show. He was a part of a great book that came out a number of years ago, I Killed. We'll talk about that. But he has a new book out. It's called Kicking Through the Ashes, My Life as a Stand-Up in the 80s Comedy Boom. And it's so full of stand-up history, especially from, the 50s on, and especially the 80s. So many stories and nuggets and things you've never knew, but you remember watching things on TV that he talks about in the book. Rich, it is a great book. So good to have you on the show, man.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you.
Funny stuff. Boy, you just let it flow, huh? Once you got started writing this, I know initially you didn't think, who, me, write a book? But talk about that process a little.
Well, I thought of myself as a stand-up, which were more sprinters than novelists who were more marathon people. And I just thought I'm good for, doing a joke and then getting immediate feedback. But the writing process, it seduced me. I really got into it. I loved it. And as I kept going, more and more stories came back, and then people remind me things, and I found notebooks, and I found things, and it started taking shape. I just loved doing it. And I wanted it to be funny. I mean, it's a stand-up book. It's a book about stand-up comics written by a stand-up. It's got to be funny, so I had to make it funny.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because people may not know that you wrote for the Jeff Foxworthy Show, Roseanne, and that discipline, writing for those shows, I guess that helped you write your own material, perhaps, or is it so different?
I always wrote my material. I always felt like I was more of a writer than a performer. When I first got on stage, it was because people, you couldn't go up to people. People were tired of me, I guess, going up to them and saying, read this, and then I'd watch them read it. And then, you didn't laugh there? Oh, wasn't that funny? I mean, I'm constantly looking to see where they're going to laugh when I think they're going to laugh. And so I had to start going on stage to find out whether what I was writing was funny or not.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember in the book, you talked about I think the first time you remember getting a laugh and the fact it felt so good, you said, this is really kind of neat. It was in college, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I really started going after it, and I took a public speaking class. I was terrible at it. I took it just because I needed the grades not to flunk out of college. And somebody said, that's an easy course. They called it a boat back then. Yeah, take this boat class, you'll get a definite B. And I got some laughs. I came in there and I read the lyrics from a David Bowie song straight up, just read it straight up. And it got laughs because I knew it would. I kind of knew it would. I kind of expected it. It was just such a weird, and then the teacher said, the professor said, yeah, you were funny. That was funny. Why don't you try to do that again? Try to be funny again. So then I took the song "Sympathy for the Devil" by the Rolling Stones, and I wrote a song parody called "Sympathy for the Life Insurance Salesman," and that got big laughs in the class.
Yeah, and it's addicting. We're going to talk about that later. I've had many comedians on the show, and with all my shows, it's always been an important part of the program. Even going back in the early days, I wanted to have some of the old timers on the show, so I actually got Buddy Hackett and Milton Berle and a lot of these people. Oh, it was amazing. But anyway, so we're going to talk about the 80s, but as you got into this and you finally got this amazing break to go on Carson, and you didn't want to eat anything. You were just for a week before you were freaking out. You even stopped doing drugs, right?
That's how badly I wanted to do well. I even quit drinking and doing drugs for a week.
Right.
I managed to be able to stop. I got so stressed out, I broke out in shingles. I mean, I didn't even know what they were. I had these blisters that just broke out, red, raw blisters, painful, on my butt and my hip, my leg, and I was like, what is this? I go to the doctor, he says, you got shingles. I mean, how old are you? I'm 31. You shouldn't be 31 years old. That's an old man thing, It's like, I had to go and do the Carson show with medicated pads. I couldn't even sit down for a couple of days. It was an intense thing back then. That was like, you were going on national TV, and there were only 3 networks, and this was the Johnny Carson show. He was the gatekeeper for comedy. Yeah,
and it was funny. You did great. And I remember reading this, I guess I read it in a book where you talked about at the end of the show, no, maybe this was the second time you went to the show and something wasn't right and you were bumped. No, you were bumped on the Mike Douglas show, right?
I got bumped on. No, it was a Merv Griffin show. I was the
Merv
bump
Griffin.
champion,
That's it.
Man.
Yeah.
I was like bumped 8 times in a row, 8 days in a row, every day. I started thinking it was my job. This was before I did the Tonight Show, and I started thinking it was my job, to go there and get bumped because you get paid, right? I'd go there and they'd go, you're out on today, and don't worry. And I'd start drinking, and they had a bar backstage, a full bar with the bartenders, old school showbiz, a guy with a bow tie and mix these weird drinks. And then I started thinking, that's my job. I show up, I get bumped. So why wait to get the word you're bumped to have a cocktail?
Right,
I started drinking before I got the word. I was bumped. And then the talent coordinator comes up to me and says, "Hey, you're on today. Unbelievable! Isn't that great?" I'm like, "No, I'm kind of hammered."
Oh man, the panic. Yeah. This is what I mean. Also about the book is so full of nuggets. You are so brutally honest about the time, about yourself. We haven't really gotten to what extent you were doing drugs and how it got to be a problem at one point. But you're so brutally honest about that.
What else are you going to do? I mean, you have to be. I mean, I'm past it now. I'm sober, 31 years, over 31 years. But at the time, I don't know whether it's chicken or egg. I don't know whether I chose this career because I knew I wouldn't have to work but 1 or a couple hours at night in a bar where I could then drink afterwards, or whether then once I got that job, it became more and more evident to me that this was a great way to go. I don't know, but you're a comic. You work 1 or 2 hours a night. You got 22 hours a day to fill, and so you can easily fill it with by playing in the devil's yard. There's no doubt about it.
Well, yeah, and it's so natural, especially in those days. This is the same thing with any rock band I've talked to, comedians I've talked to. You get that adulation. It feels so good on stage. And then you want to keep that high. You want to keep that
chase
buzz.
Chase the high.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Chase the high. Yeah, so
chase that stage high. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's completely understandable. We're talking about the brand new book just came out, Kicking Through the Ashes: My Life as a Stand-Up in the 1980s Comedy Boom, and it was a boom. This is we're talking to Rich Shydner, by the way, funny comedian you've seen on Late Night with David Letterman and The Tonight Show and. She's just about everything. The HBO, The Mind of the Married Man you wrote for, and the list goes on and on and on. But let's talk a little bit about your writing and how many of the things come out of your head. Because I know you bought 3 jokes that you can remember. I think 3 of them you bought at The Tonight Show or for The Tonight Show. And one of them was about Pat Robertson. Very funny joke, still.
No, I wrote that one. Here's the thing. I wrote the Pat Robertson joke. He was running for president. He said, whatever this was, 87, 88, whatever, and at that time he's running for president. He said, I'm running for president because God told me to run for president. I said, when God tells me to vote for him, I will.
Yeah, perfect timing on that.
Right?
That was great.
Right. But a friend of mine, John Pate, another comic, had written a joke about the devil, saying the devil had to be the dumbest individual ever because the devil's sitting in heaven, God's right-hand angel, according to the story, and then thinks to himself, let's see, God's all-powerful, he's omnipotent, yeah, I can take him. And so I loved that joke, and I was doing a Tonight Show, and I had the Pat Robertson joke and a couple other jokes about religion, and John was like, I said, I'll sell you that joke. So I bought it, and when I did it, after the show, Jim McCulley comes back and said, Johnny loved that one joke, that one joke about the... And I'm thinking, all the jokes were mine except for one. I hope it's not John Pate's joke. I hope it's not the joke that I bought that he loves the most. John's sitting right there, and I was just thinking to myself, please not be his joke. Not just like a selfish kind of thought.
Yeah, it's only it's the thing I'm trying to put into words what I notice when I watch you perform, even in the early days and even recently. You're just so. You have such conviction, and it really sounds like it's out of your life, whether it is or not. And you have this great timing. It's like bam, 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 bam. You don't wait for the punchline. You just have the right timing, man. I don't know how to put it.
I don't know. It's you do it, and you become. It's like you do the job, then you become the job. I certainly didn't have it before. I was always funny. The comics that I know, I was always funny, but learning how to do what you said, the timing of a joke, but I've been real enthusiastic. I look at pictures of me when this woman sent me these pictures from like 1980 and 81, and I was really just getting out on the road and starting, and I was so wild in these pictures, and I realized I was just always so, when you say conviction, I was always so passionate about getting a laugh. I just wanted to hear those laughs. I wanted to hear the people laugh as loud and as hard as possible. So I went after it. I mean, sometimes today comics, and it's a different generational thing, they don't want to look like they're really trying hard. It's just, that's the style.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the style, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we went after it. I mean, my generation, I went after it. I mean, there was no question. If you came in the room, this guy is trying to make us laugh. He is working up there.
Right, you're projecting your voice, the right volume that gets right through any clutter or misunderstanding.
Oh, yeah.
Let me just play a sample of how you can talk about any interesting, just everyday life thing. This is not necessarily the funniest stuff that you have. I mean, there's so much out there, and later after our interview, we're going to play a good chunk of it for the audience. But here's some fairly recent stuff for about a minute or two.
I'm always worried about making big money. I never notice how I waste a little money all the time. Like I can't believe I still have a landline. We have a landline in the house. I mean, a landline. Not only do I have a landline, but I gotta get one with all the options. I gotta get one with all the bells and whistles. Gotta get things like I got call forwarding. What about call forward? I don't go anywhere. Call forward to another room in the house. Where am I call forward to? Three-way. I've never three-wayed anything in my life. My favorite's call waiting. What happens with call waiting is I'm talking on the phone to somebody, I hear a beep. I put the one person hold, tell the other person I can't talk to them right now. That cost me $15 a month. There used to be a busy signal, did the job for free. Because the only people who even call on the landline are creditors. And I'll talk to them too. I got nothing to do in the daytime. Hello? No, yeah, it's Rich Shydner. That's right, Shydner, yeah. Yeah, no, I know I'm late. I told the guy yesterday I was late. Don't you talk to each other? Is he in the office right now? Look around. Stand up. See if you see his head in another cubicle. Look around a little bit. Hey, are you even in an office? Is this one of these jobs you make money at the internet, sitting at home? Are you wearing any clothes? I won't talk to a naked man about my finance. I'll tell you that right now.
A lot more of that coming up later. Rich Shydner, and I know from what you've written and other people, they don't like hearing their own voice, so I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but some funny stuff.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think I wrote it in this book. It was Rodney Dangerfield once, and I was asking him advice, and what I do to get better. And he said, "You got to tape yourself, man. You got to tape yourself. You got to tape you." I said, "I don't do that." He said, "Why don't you?" I said, "I can't stand the sound of my voice. I sound like an idiot." And Rodney goes, "Of course you're an idiot. You're a comedian." What do you think? You're a doctor? You're an idiot.
It was. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. His point was, you got to listen to the tape. You got to listen to why people are laughing. They'll tell you what's funny about yourself, so you can. You really need to listen to the tapes, but I've always had a hard time with
Me too. Listening to air checks of shows, like, oh God, what I do. But boy, you do learn. It's tough, but you learn.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of Rodney Dangerfield, that great story, you got to tell everybody the cocaine story. I don't know. It might have been. It may have even been the same night that he told you got to tape your stuff. But it's so funny.
Well, Rodney had a club, the Dangerfield was up on the Upper East Side. I think it was like, it was on First Avenue, 60th or somewhere around there. And, or the 50s, I can't remember. It doesn't matter. So Rodney had this club, and he would hire us young comics to work the late night from 12 to 4 in the morning, just drunks. It was gladiator work, brutal, heckling, just. And Rodney would sit in the back of the room. You could hear, I guess he'd finished his shows, and you can hear him laughing. You're up there just trading blows with the audience. And I came off one night, and he walks up to me, and Rodney back then, he used to wear a suit, always wore a suit and tie, on stage. But he'd come off, he'd take that off, and he put a robe on, and he didn't have anything underneath the robe, and he never really bothered to close the robe. So when you saw Rodney off stage, you saw Rodney off stage.
Was he oblivious to it, or he didn't, or he
didn't care? He didn't care. It's just like he's just walking around. It's like it's his club. It was almost like his bathroom. I mean, it was his club, but he didn't care. He just walked around. He got these slippers, and it was hilarious. he would just come off and he'd sit in the back of the room. It was late night, nobody was there. And he'd be drinking. So he comes up and he goes, "Hey, kid, you're all right, man. You got a lot of guts, man. You stay up there. I like that, man. All right. Hey, you want to do some drugs? You want to do some cocaine?" I'm like, "Absolutely, man.
Sure.
You want to do coke with Rodney? Absolutely." So we
Absolutely.
get down to his office, and we're doing cocaine. And this was, by the way, the first time I realized that there were different types of coke out there. That this was celebrity coke. I never realized there was celebrity coke, because this was real coke. The coke that I was doing off the street was so cut with baby laxative, it kept you more regular than high. You do a line and take a dump. You do a line, take a dump.
Oh, God.
This is real cocaine, and that's when I asked Rodney about how to kind of get better, and he said tape yourself. And that whole conversation, he gave me ties. I still have old ties. He had, he always wore a solid red tie when he's on stage. And fans would bring him red ties thinking they were doing him a favor. He goes, "But they got shit on them, man. I can't wear them, man. They got stuff. Look at this stuff, man." They were hand-painted ties. He gave me a handful of them because I used to wear old suits. So Ronnie just gives me, out of a drawer of his desk, he just pulls these ties out. "Here, take these, man. You like these, man. You wear them. Wear them in those suits, man. They'll work. They'll work."
Oh, it's
And so I still have the ties. But we're doing lines of cocaine off of this glass table. And that was a real problem, because every time I bent down to do a line of coke, I could see Rodney's nuts hanging underneath the table. So that was my real lesson. There's no such thing as free cocaine.
Yeah.
That's what I really learned.
There you go. Oh, it's funny. This full of stories like this. By the way, when I remember it was Richard Lewis, who was telling me at first the drugs seemed to work for him, and the comedy, everything seemed to work. He was doing, but then it just completely changed. Was that something that worked with you?
Yeah. Well, the alcohol. Look, I wrote a book. I mean, I had panic attacks when I was a kid. I was very shy and scared and angry, and the drugs and the alcohol kind of let me loose, and I got loose. It broke down some doors. It opened some windows, all that kind of stuff. And it gave me freedom. The alcohol drugs gave me freedom. And eventually they become the whole thing, and they take away the freedom. And that's what happened to me. And I lost my sense of humor. That's what it was, man. That was the thing they took from me that was the most precious thing. I was angry and withdrawn, and the alcohol and drugs were the only thing I was doing, really. And it just became the opposite of how it started.
Yeah, coke is not good for timing, is it?
No, cocaine was the least, and this is just for me. When I did acid and mushrooms and pot, sometimes I'd come up with material and jokes that could actually be used, but coke just made you talk faster, and you just talked a lot, and it was good for performance, for the monkeys performing, jabbering away up there. But it didn't. I never created anything off it.
Mm-hmm.
I never came up and created anything. You just talked the game. You just talked.
I was watching a Carson from a few weeks ago. They were on, of course, on Antenna, and one of the appearances, Rodney was sweating, and the way he was talking, and behind, I heard rumors that he did coke, but you could tell that night he was either doing speed or something, because it was profusely sweating. Yeah,
and I listen, man. I know how when you're, and I've been on stage under the influence of every drug there was, and when you're up there, you're on a tightrope anyway, But all of a sudden now you've just added a wind machine, because it's really hard to hang on. You're just trying to keep it together. I've had every experience you can, purposely and accidentally, even pot. I mean, I opened up for Peter Tosh back in 81. I don't know if you.
Oh yeah.
He was one of the original Wailers, and so
speaking of pot,
Bob Marley fan.
Yeah.
Right. So I was backstage. Well, before I did his show, Rich Hall, another comic, called me and said he'd opened up for Peter Tosh in Philly. I was opening up for him in Washington D.C. He said, "Stay away from backstage, man. I got a contact high. I can barely do my act." And I was thinking, well, I smoke a lot of weed. I was like, it's like I'm used to this stuff. It won't bother me. So I'm backstage before the show, and these Rastafarians spot me. Somebody told me he's the comic, because I'm pacing around. I'm practically the only white guy back there, and I'm pacing around, and they go, "Funny man, come over here." And I walk over to these guys, and they hand me a burning baseball bat. I had never seen a joint this big. I didn't know how to hold it, man. And it was Jamaican. It was Jamaican weed. I've been smoking crappy shake weed, This
right.
was like, so 2 hits of this, and next thing I know, I was being introduced like I was underwater. and I couldn't. I go out on the stage. My buddy said I walked out on stage. I laughed for 15 minutes and I left.
Funny. You left. That's right. That's right. I read that. That was a great story. But you left.
Yeah, and the only thing that saved me was the audience was as high as I was. They were laughing at what they thought I was laughing at. I mean, it was, I was lucky. But there were other times when I wasn't lucky. I mean, I had that experience. You talking about Rodney, about being on stage, coked up, and talking so fast that I'd look at the audience and they couldn't. They'd be looking at me like dogs. They go, "What is he saying?" He's, I've already got a mushy kind of South Jersey accent anyway, and I was cranked up, and I was just spot welding the words together. They couldn't even understand what I was saying.
Right.
You see that look on their faces, and you're unable to slow down. I had to start drinking shots of whiskey on stage to try to slow down.
Wow.
It's a panic.
Yeah, because your brain is just so far ahead of your lips, you can't keep up.
Yes, exactly. I can't keep up. I can't think how to stop it because you're just talking. You're all talking fast.
On most of your appearances, or in some of your appearances on Letterman and on Carson and Leno, how many of those times were you under the influence of something, pot or?
Well, the thing is, I did, like I said, the Merv Griffins. I did a few of those high and coked up, and I never, and an evening improv, and my second Tonight Show is when I got in trouble because I didn't quit drinking and doing drugs. I thought it was enough if I didn't do coke the night before. That's how far gone I was. I'd rationalized it. I said, well, this is what I do now. I drink and I do drugs. I'm on the edge. I was hanging out with Sam Kinison a lot, and we were, I just thought this is what I do.
Sure.
So I said, I just don't want to do coke the night before I do the Tonight Show. So I went there a little hungover, a little bit, maybe still a little bit, I don't know, whatever it is, but I did material I shouldn't have done on that second Tonight Show, and I got in real trouble as I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
I changed the material, which you can't do.
Yeah, that really was a slap in the face. So you really kind of learned a lesson that night.
Well, I got sober after that, and then when I came back, I was sharper, clearer. I got back to the funny. I got back to why I was doing it to begin with.
Right.
I wasn't doing it as some sort of way to drink and do drugs. I was doing it to hear the laughter. I'd lost the music for a while, but when I got rid of the alcohol and drugs, then I was able to get back to it.
This book, Kicking Through the Ashes, My Life as a Stand-Up in the 1980s Comedy Boom, Rich Shydner. It's just, the 80s, it's amazing. I knew it was a boom. That's when I got into it. I remember when Jay Leno, when I first met him, he did a week at a time at not Charlie Goodnight's, the Comedy Zone in Raleigh. He would do a whole week, and then we'd go out, and he'd look for magazines about motorcycles after the show. Oh, seriously, that was his partying. He was great.
Yeah, that's Jay. That is absolutely, look, he was, and I wrote a story about him in the book because he was the king of the comedy clubs. I mean, he was like the Marines. He was the first guy in, and I remember I'd go around, and I like to go long. I like to do a long show back then, and I like to see. I'd walk into a club, and I'd go, "What's the record?" I want to know who's been on stage for the longest, so I could break it. Somebody come in, you got to go. Somebody did an hour and a half. I go, no problem. I'd knock 2 hours out, on the show.
Yeah.
And I'd come in after following Jay when he started doing the clubs. And they go, Leno did 3 hours. I go, 3 hours? What did he do? Lock the door like Wagner, like on opera? Did he not let the crowd out? 3 hours. He got like 4 ovations. He kept calling him back.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did write that because people today think of Jay Leno. They like Jay Leno. They remember his monologue from The Tonight Show. But during the 80s, he was so funny. When he'd be on, Letterman had him on every month without fail.
Yeah.
Introduced him as his best friend. And many of those, I was lucky enough on several of those occasions to be there, in the green room. And I got to tell you, it was, he was so funny. People forget that.
Yeah, well, he helped make Letterman show as much as anybody else.
Yes, he did.
He was sort of like, for Johnny Carson had Don Rickles sort of to come in there. Don could say things that Johnny nobody else could, and Jay could say things that David nobody else could, and make him laugh in a way nobody else could. And it was a great thing they had back and forth, a great thing. And then he'd come out in those clubs, and they were packed because Letterman was the hottest show.
Yep.
I mean, and the people who came out to nightclubs watched Letterman. My parents didn't go out to nightclubs. They watched Johnny. My dad watched Johnny.
Right.
But people of my generation who were out in the nightclubs then, they all watched Letterman.
That's right.
So Leno was the guy. He was the guy, man.
You met, and Letterman was so much for the rock culture, or if you want to call it the rock culture. He didn't even work Friday nights. I mean, that's because he knew people were out partying on Friday night. I mean, it was perfect.
Yeah, he knew.
Yeah.
He knew, exactly. And Leno, again, the younger comics, because they always think he's sort of this, this middle of the road, affable, they didn't see him in the early 80s. He was rough, man. He was blue collar. Somebody once called him the Springsteen of comedy, and I thought it was like the label I wanted. I wanted that label, but you had to give it up. Jay was that guy.
Yeah,
he really was.
Absolutely. So many interesting things in the book I want to bring up, but the 80s. It was amazing. You pointed out that it was such a comedy boom. There was almost for a period a shortage of comics. But then in 1990, it was like the peak. And then by 1995, there were fewer than 100 clubs.
Yeah. So they had that kind of huge explosion when there were no clubs. Virtually 3 paying clubs in the late 70s. They were all on the West Coast in California. And then all of a sudden, there are clubs everywhere. Every city had one, multiple clubs in cities. It's huge now. It's never gone back to where it was in the 70s when there are no comedy clubs. There are comedy clubs in every major city, multiple comedy clubs in cities like Atlanta or Austin or wherever. There are multiple clubs all over the state. Small towns have comedy nights once a week or once a month in some bar. So it's everywhere. I mean, I did a count, probably 1979, I figured there were about 400 comics top to bottom in the whole country. 400 people, from Robin Williams and Steve Martin, Richard Pryor on down. There are 400 comics in Toledo, Ohio now.
Yeah. It is so much. And I remember I just took it for granted. It was a great time to be alive. But you look back at some of the old time comedians, and I always wondered about this. Pat Cooper, to me, he's a great guest on the radio. He blew me away. Funny guest, but you never saw him, to my knowledge, on Letterman. Never saw him on Carson. I know he did probably Mike Douglas and a few others, but do you have any thoughts about Pat Cooper?
Yeah, I do have thoughts on that. I mean, I have his albums from that early period when he put out his albums, late 50s, early 60s. He sort of did the Italian shtick, and
right.
He was a good Vegas sort of opening act kind of guy. Sam Kinison, when he did Anger, he made Anger a commodity, right? Sam Kinison made Anger a commodity. George Carlin admitted in his book that he became angrier in his act because of watching Sam. And I think you would talk, Pat Cooper's one of those guys who also, it fit him. He was always an angry kind of guy, and his act became angrier because it just is funnier. He just became this angry old guy.
Yeah.
When he was on Howard Stern and all, and so he had a career resurgence in a way that was even far different than his younger self, that's for sure.
It's very interesting. Let's talk about, I know I only have a few more minutes with you, and I want to just get your recollection. I'm going to bring up a couple of comics that you might want to just comment about, people you write about. First of all, we did talk about Leno. Letterman, you did talk about how funny, but the guy was it's amazing how funny Letterman is, just as ad-libbing. Unbelievable. Let's talk a little bit about, maybe share a story or two about from Sam Kinison or maybe Andy Kauffman, Robin Williams, Bill Hicks. You got it all in here.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I was friends with Bill Hicks and Kinison. Andy I wasn't friends with. I was friendly with Robin. But Andy came in the first improv. I was emceeing in 1981 in New York City Improv. And he came in with 2 professional wrestlers. He came in with Captain Lou Albano and Freddie Blassie, who I was a wrestling fan when I was young, and I recognized those guys. I walked up to him, and I told him, hey, I'm a fan of you guys, and they were kind of surprised I even recognized him. They must have told Andy that I did that, because Andy comes over to me in the bar in the Improv, and he says, hey, man, I'm going to do this wrestling thing on stage tonight. you want to do it with me? You want to be in it with me? I go, yeah, what do you want to do? He says, well, you be the manager for women. I'm going to wrestle a woman. I was like, what? Yeah. And it's a tiny little stage, an improv stage was. He says, yeah, I'll do it. We'll do like I'll yell at you and I'll fake push you. And I say, I know how to do it. Okay, cool. So I bring him on stage, and it's a packed house, and it's in New York City. It's 81, and Andy Kaufman, people go crazy. He's a star, he comes in, they're like, oh my God, it's Andy Kaufman. They're all happy to see him. They're screaming. And he goes on stage, and he's got this little sweat pants and sweat T-shirt on, and he goes, I love women. And Holdings goes, yeah, that's great. He goes, I love women best when they're cooking for me, when they're cleaning my house. That's what women should be doing, cleaning the house and cooking for a man, because that's what they should be doing.
Yeah.
And the audience starts going, wait a minute, that's not so funny. But he keeps pounding it, right? There's no woman is equal to a man, and now they're booing him. Within 2 minutes, they went from cheering him to booing him. And he goes, no woman could beat a man in wrestling. And he's posing, he's got this bad body. He's doing muscle poses like he's Schwarzenegger or something. And they're booing him. They're he turned them completely hating him. And so he says, and he pulls out 5 $100 bills. He says, any woman can pin me, can beat me in wrestling, can have this money. And who wants to do it? So the women are all raising their hands. He goes, somebody better come up and help the women, manage the women wrestling, because they won't be able to beat me because I'm an athlete.
Oh, yeah, I remember all of this. So I'm just, the way this evolved. Keep going, yeah.
Yeah, and he's booing. This is the first time he did it. And they're booing him. And so I go up and help, and he's yelling at me, and I'm yelling at him, and he pushes me, fake. But they were screaming at him, the whole audience. And so we get this woman. He finally picks one. He dismisses a couple as not being cute enough, which made the women hate him even more, which wasn't even possible. They hate him so much. And so this woman goes, what do I do? I knew Andy was going to take a fall. I just knew it. So I said, well, just pick up his leg. Just grab his leg. So they lock up, the hand lock up. And she just reaches down, picks up his leg, and Andy flops back. It was so obvious. He just flops back on his back. This little tiny stage. And she falls on top. And I do a quick pin, 1, 2, 3. And she jumps up, and I raise her hand. And the whole place is now cheering like we won the Olympic gold in the hockey. The whole place is just cheering, screaming. And Andy jumps up behind us. I didn't see him at first, and he grabs the money off the piano top. He grabs the cash, and he waves it in the air, and he kicks open the side door. There's an emergency exit. He kicks it over, and he runs out. He runs with the money. He makes sure everybody, and the whole place starts chasing him. I mean, the whole bar tries. It was like a Three Stooges, where people get stuck in the doorway. The Three Stooges would get stuck in the doorway. They couldn't get people were stuck in the doorway. He jumps in a limo outside with Lou Albano and Freddie Blassie, and they take off. But they go slowly down the street so guys could chase them. Guys were chasing them down the street. And he's waving the money out the window, taunting them.
To him, this is a hit. I mean, it's great that they hate me. He thinks this is what he wants. He wants that.
That's what he came back. He came back the next night. And he thanked me. He said, "Oh my God, that went." I said, "He said that went perfect." I said, well, I got it. I got it, man.
I remember the story. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Nobody in the audience that night understood what they got played. They didn't even understand how he played them.
That's right. I remember one of the things when I talked to David Letterman, he told me the story. I wondered, did he know when Andy Kaufman was on with that wrestler and he the wrestler
Jerry Lawler?
Yeah,
Jerry Lawler. Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe Letterman knew. Letterman at the time, he got hot coffee went on his lap. He said, no, I had no idea. I figured maybe during a commercial. Andy would say, hey, I'm just joking. But I guess he never let his fellow comedians necessarily or talk show hosts necessarily know what's going on. He kept them in the dark, too. Yeah.
No, he that night, that night was the first time he did it. So I was just a nobody MC at the Improv. So he just told me, what he was doing. I knew what he was doing. I mean, I knew professional wrestling. I said, what was amazing to me was he turned the comedy crowd into a professional wrestling crowd in 2 minutes, and they never knew it. They never got it. They never got that he was effing with them. They never got it.
Listen,
it was brilliant. It was the most brilliant thing I've ever seen.
There's great, whether you're into comedy or not, but if you are into comedy, This is like a history book, but it's full of nuggets of stuff that is oh wow stuff. Like, oh wow, I remember that, but you never knew the behind the scene. That's what this book has. I really like it. Kicking Through the Ashes, My Life as a Stand-Up in the 80s, or I should say, My Life as a Stand-Up in the 1980s comedy boom. Rich Shydner, it's great always having you on the Allan Handelman Show.
Oh, man, thank you so much, Alan. This was great. Thank you, man.
Thank you, man.